Okay, I am recording. This is Scott Brewster. I host the SharePoint User Group of DC. I have been working in SharePoint since about 2008, and I absolutely love the product. I have moved from the back end of SharePoint to just the front end of SharePoint, and I've done a lot of architecture stuff inside, from the network architecture of SharePoint to information architecture of SharePoint and everything else. I ran across a post about NIST 800-207 about zero architecture a few months ago, and I started reading up on it, and I got really, really interested because it's something that I've been thinking about. I just never had a term associated with it. It was just because of the fact that we've all been working from home. And so I wanted to give this topic today. The different ways you can contact me on Twitter, SP Superheroes for SharePoint Superheroes. You can email me at Scott@SharePoint Superheroes. I do have a YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, because YouTube says I need to have 100 subscribers before they will give me a properly named URL, so it doesn't have all those funky letters behind the slash. And you can find me on LinkedIn if we've not connected. Go ahead and connect. And I share a lot of information about jobs that I know of in the area. I don't get kickbacks unless you have a full polygraph and top secret with SCI. So that's not what I'm doing. But I want to get a stronger community, because the stronger we are, the better product we can deliver for the customers. The more the customer likes SharePoint, the more they want, people to do more SharePoint work, and that drives up our rates. So I honestly love just building a stronger SharePoint community. So this is the post that I saw, I guess, what was it, 5 months ago? Yeah, about 5 months ago. And I clicked save because I have like 1,000 saved articles in LinkedIn. And I downloaded this book, and I looked into it, and I wanted to know a whole lot more. And so I started digging. And so inside of NIST 800-207, the definition reads: Zero Trust provides a collection of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty in enforcing accurate, least privilege per request access decisions in information systems and services in the face of a network viewed as compromised. Zero Trust architecture is an enterprise's cybersecurity plan that utilizes zero trust concepts and encompasses component relationships, workflow planning, and access policies. Therefore, a zero trust enterprise is the network infrastructure, physical and virtual, and operational policies that are in place for an enterprise as a product of zero trust architecture plan. That's a mouthful. To really just say, we cannot trust what's on the internet or on your intranet, really, on your local area network. So if you have been in IT as long as I have, you remember that back in the day is kind of like, if you're working in a classified environment right now, where you did not have access to the internet. You were only on your network, and you only had access to things within your network. And I don't know about you, but I used to FTP to different things, and I used to gopher to different things, and I used to, everything was over port 80, HTTP and not HTTPS. And over the years, we would get the internet, but our intranet sites might still be on port 80. I remember the first SharePoint farm I put together, because of what was given to me to work with. I originally had SharePoint on port 80, and we had no certificates whatsoever. I did not have a fully qualified domain name. It was just a server name. And so, here I am telling people, here, type in the server name and you can get to the SharePoint site. Our database was not encrypted. And I'll be honest, it was the most unsecured mess that I probably ever put together in my life. But I didn't have at that time with MOS 2007 the ability. I didn't have licenses. I didn't have access to a license machine. To create my own certificates on the servers until about a year later, after enough bugging and pestering of the folks in charge of me. But we want to treat everything and everyone as if we've already got a breach and that we need to have secure connections between everything. And that means that we want to secure identity. We want rules based on identity. We want multi-factor authentication. We want encryption at rest on everything. We want encryption at transit on everything. On every Windows server, there should be server certificates so that each server can talk to each other encrypted without all of these extra routes and rules put into your firewalls. And that way we can drop the external perimeter that most people have as their security boundary. Because right now, everybody within that boundary kind of trusts everything that's on there. And I won't say anything about my current client, but I've had former clients, different government agencies, where they still had a lot of web infrastructure on their intranet that was HTTP and completely insecure, just open to virtually anybody as long as you're on the network. And the thing is that it only takes one breach to then expose all of that data whenever you trust anyone on the network. And what we want to do is put basically microsegmentation and have little perimeters around every device and every user. And why is this such a big deal right now? Why is everybody working from home and not at their desks, especially if you're working for a government organization right now? It's because of COVID. I was very fortunate with the agency that I'm supporting right now that I was able to work from home. I even changed contract companies I was working for midstream 2 weeks after COVID and the shutdown happened. And they just did a little paperwork and I got to keep my same laptop and everything. So I was very fortunate. But I know a lot of people, they had no idea how they were going to do any kind of work because most of their stuff had always been on a classified environment. And they've been rapidly pushing Microsoft 365, Office 365 through GovCloud, GCC high or low for whoever I'm talking about. And it's been painful to say the least, because they're being routed back into their networks to jump over different things. So, typically, here you are as the user and you want to go hit the Microsoft Cloud, and then we're putting a hurdle in your way saying that you need to come back to the home organization, go through the VPN tunnels, and slow everything down. I know that on my home network here, I pay for 1 gig speeds up and down. Whenever I do a test, I'm running about 980 megabits per second, up and down. As soon as I connect to the VPN, I'm at about 80 megabits per second up and down, which is wonderful because apparently part of the reason I was having an issue a couple of months ago is because I had a bad LAN cable because I was trying to keep a wired connection to to my router for the work computer, and I was only getting about 3 megabits per second. And apparently it was something with the LAN port, because I swapped out 3 different cables and it wasn't the cable. It was a port inside the laptop. So going over Wi-Fi, I'm going back through the, tunnel and everything from the VPN, and I'm thinking, why are we going through all of these VPN tunnels? If you go out onto YouTube and you go to any technical video that someone has put out there, half of them are trying to hawk some kind of a VPN solution to you. And honestly, as long as you are using TLS on all of your sites and you are using multi-factor authentication where you need to and everything else, you don't need a VPN to do most of your work. The VPN is really just so you can get Netflix from another country. That's about it, if you're doing things right. So we got 7 major tenants in 800-207 that we need to cover. Okay. And it's all data sources and computing services are considered resources. So a network may be composed of multi-classes of device. We're talking phones, we're talking PCs, we're talking printers, we're talking everything. Network may also have small footprint devices that send data to aggregate storage, software as a service, systems sending instructions to actuators and other functions. And an enterprise may decide to classify personally owned devices as resources. So in some of your organizations, you might have been handed a government issued phone, and in some, you might be able to add your own phone and use some kind of a managed service, where I know that if you connect it properly with Office 365, that it will create an encrypted partition on your phone that I, as an administrator of an Office 365 tenant, can wipe as soon as we decide to fire you. That's what you need to do. You don't want the policies on your BYOD, bring your own device, phones and tablets to be able to store and not get deleted in case a phone is lost or an employee runs out of the country or whatever. You want to be able to wipe their stuff as soon as it's reconnected to the network, any network. All communication is secured regardless of network location. Network location alone does not imply trust. And this is what I was talking about. A lot of those web infrastructure things that we find on our intranet is still being served up to you via port 80. And, you might have file shares, and there's not a lot of security around those file shares. SharePoint libraries are obviously a lot more secure. There's a lot more auditing in place. And so we know who accesses what, how often. We can put rules around, hey, we don't want people logging in and looking at data at 9 p.m. at night or at 1 a.m. because something smells fishy. So we can put all these rules in place and, say that the devices and the people are not inherently secure just because they are on our local network. So we want to encrypt everything and all that good stuff. Access to individual enterprise resources is granted on a per session basis. So trust in the requester is evaluated before the access is granted. Access should also be granted with the least privileges needed to complete the task. This could mean only sometime recently for this particular transaction and may not occur directly before initiating a session or performing a transaction with a resource. However, authentication and authorization to one resource will not automatically grant access to a different resource. And so on your SAML tokens, whenever you have a need to get to certain applications or websites or anything, you want to be able to have attributes tied to these individual accounts so that whenever you're coming in, it says, okay, your machine meets these rules of having an up-to-date antivirus and these programs installed and this, that, and the other thing. So that's met. Now we need to, look at the user and make certain that the user is logging in at the right time, multi-factor authentication, et cetera, et cetera. And then all these attributes are combined so that we can say, if this user is at one of the approved IP addresses, then they can access everything. If if everything else is met, but the IP address shows that it's coming from Russia, no. So there's like this range of factors, and we want to make certain that 100% or at least 90% of these things are being met in order to grant somebody that access. And we, of course, still want to do least privilege, which giving everyone site collection admin and whatnot is definitely not a good thing. Access to resources determined by dynamic policy, including the observable state of client identity, application service, and the requesting asset, and may include other behavioral and environmental attributes. An organization protects resources by defining what resource it has and who its members are, or ability to authenticate users from a federated community, and what access to resources those members need. For Zero Trust, client identity can include the user account or service identity and associated attributes assigned by the enterprise to that account or artifacts to authenticate automated tasks. Requesting asset state can include device characteristics such as software versions installed, network location, time data of request, previously observed behavior, and installed credentials. Behavioral attributes include, but not limited to, automated subject analytics, device analytics, and measured deviations from observed usage patterns. Policy is the set of access rules based on attributes that an organization assigns to a subject, data asset, or application. Environmental attributes may include such factors as requester network location, time, reported active attacks, etc. These rules and attributes are based on the needs of the business process and acceptable level of risk. Resource access and action permission policies can vary based on the sensitivity of the resource data. Least privilege principles are applied to restrict both visibility and accessibility. So visibility is, hey, it looks like something is out there. Accessibility is, can I open it? The security trimming inside of SharePoint, you don't see what you don't have access to. Sometimes there's visibility where you can tell that something exists. You just need to go through a couple extra hurdles in order to get the access. But most of this right here is what I was talking about before I started reading it, of all those different attributes that are tied to your session when you try to connect to a service. The enterprise monitors and measures the integrity and security posture of all owned and associated assets. No asset is inherently trusted. The enterprise evaluates the security posture of the asset when evaluating a resource request. An enterprise implementing a zero trust architecture should establish a continuous diagnostics and mitigation or similar system to monitor the state of devices and applications, and should apply patches, fixes as needed. Assets that are discovered to be subverted, have known vulnerabilities, and or are not managed by the enterprise may be treated differently, including denial of all connections to enterprise resources than devices owned by or associated with the enterprise that are deemed to be in their most secure state. Admit someone. There we go. Okay, he's in. This too requires a robust monitoring and reporting system in place to provide actionable data about the current state of enterprise resources. So, again, nothing is trusted by default. Phones, personally owned devices, and everything else. So you might be okay with allowing a phone to access email, as long as you've installed a soft certificate onto the phone and it has been covered under the policies in Office 365, but you won't be able to access anything else on the network. So you can tailor the level of access based on the person and the device for which they're coming into the network. And so that's very important because if something does get compromised, you really want to limit the extent of the breach if something were to ever happen. All resource authentication and authorization are dynamic and strictly enforced before access is allowed. This is a constant cycle of obtaining access, scanning and assessing threats, adapting and continually reevaluating trust in ongoing communication. An enterprise implementing a zero trust architecture would be expected to have identity, credential, and access management and asset management systems in place. This includes the use of multi-factor authentication for access to some or all enterprise resources. Continual monitoring with possible reauthentication and reauthorization occurs throughout user transactions, as defined and enforced by policy. That strives to achieve a balance of security, availability, usability, and cost efficiency. So I don't know about you, but I've gone to certain websites. If you're involved with government stuff at all, you might know of a system called JPass. I think it's about to retire here soon with another thing that I originally worked on, and then it was converted into another thing in order to track everybody's security clearances. Long time ago, some knucklehead accessed it from an airport and forgot to log out. So they put in a rule on the thing that you now have to re-authenticate every 15 minutes, which drove the adjudicators who used to work with me up the wall because they had to be inside this application every day, all day long. And you can imagine how frustrating it is to type in your PIN from your CAC. Actually, at that time, I think they're still using passwords. They'd have to type in a new password every 15 minutes to maintain access. And it was very painful. Most of that stuff we want to keep behind the scenes so that you sign in once with your multi-factor authentication using your CAC or your PIV, whatever we're using in the government, or if possible, an RSA key fob or the Microsoft authentication text or app that goes to your phone. But the problem for a lot of contractors anyway is if we wanted to use one of those third-party tools for multi-factor authentication, we can't bring our cell phones into a SCIF. So that made it really hard for us to set this up for a company that I used to work for. Whenever we wanted people to be able to get to their emails. And so we had to get everyone to do the voice call for authentication and have it go to their desk phones at their work. And it was a little painful because, they'd have to set some of the stuff up and then go into their office and then have it, go the rest of the way. So I let them go without multi-factor for a couple of days until they got to their client site, and then I would turn on multi-factor so that everything would be connected properly. Enterprise collects as much information as possible about the current state of assets, network infrastructure, and communication, and uses it to improve its security posture. An enterprise should collect data about asset security posture, network traffic, and access requests, process that data, and use any insight gained to improve policy creation and enforcement. So, company I used to work for, I still support them. I've created a number of policies in their 365 tenant so that we can see behaviors and patterns. And I don't initially block anything because I'm still learning this myself. And we wanted to make certain that if we were to see a certain behavior, that we would block it at the right time. they had continued to get a lot of spam until recently, whenever I finally figured out how to block traffic from a number of foreign domains. And as soon as I did that, most of the spam completely stopped. But you can see that people are trying to authenticate to your 365 tenant from your state, from outside the state, from outside the country. And you can pick up these anomalies to say, okay, we know this person's on vacation. We're not worried. We know where he's coming from, down in Florida. But this other person we know is not in Vietnam, and we want to block everything trying to access from outside the United States. So we were able to do a lot of blocks and create these rules, but we wanted to monitor all the traffic initially before we started figuring out what policies to put into place. And that's an ongoing process. It does not end. You want to continue to look at all of your logs. Now, if you go into, let me finish this and then I'll tell you where to go. So lo and behold, this morning, I saw this post on LinkedIn from Planet Technologies Defense Industrial Base Community. So if you don't know of the group on LinkedIn, I'd suggest you look for it because they post a lot of wonderful stuff, SharePoint related, but really government and security and whatnot. So from here, I found the book that they linked to, and it was very, very useful. I will give you links to all these things here in a half second. But I wanted you to take a look at this and look at the book. So here is your special publication 800-207 from the NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and read this. It's not a small publication, which is why I can't give it justice by covering it in this session. We also, here's what that link goes to from Planet. And so here, Microsoft says, these are 7 guiding principles of trust, of zero trust architecture. And it goes through every little thing that you want to do inside of your tenant to lock things down. So you want to secure your endpoints, your applications, your data, infrastructure, networks, everything. You want to secure all of that. And then this is basically a step-by-step walkthrough of it on what you need to do. So it's a wonderful asset. I'm very thrilled that Planet put this out today because I was able to grab it and give it to you. So I highly suggest that you go to this right here. I will copy that URL and I will paste it into the chat and click paste. So I would suggest definitely go in there, and then yeah, this is actually where it first takes you to when you look at that post from Planet. So it takes you here, and then it was the Zero Trust Deployment Center is what I just showed you the link for. And copy and paste into the chat. And so there you go. The Microsoft Zero Trust Maturity Model is something that I'd highly recommend you go through as well. It's a PDF that you can download and get. So a lot of beautiful stuff in there to explain how to, because it's kind of like GDPR and some of these other things where you can get a grade and say, I've optimized these things, but I'm still deficient in these other things. And you, as an organization, can figure out, your roadmap toward reaching maturity. So there's that. And then I'm going to pull these over here real quick. So you want to get started by coming into the compliance center. This is to my tenant, so my score is absolutely horrible because it's not like I'm doing any federation to my home network or anything like that. And I'm the only, well, my wife and I are the only users to my 365 tenant that I have personally that you're connected to at the moment. And if I didn't keep certain things open, you wouldn't be able to connect to this session. So there's that. Then understanding how to work with Azure AD is probably your second most important thing. So if you go into Azure AD, there are all of these things that you need to get through. And in it, you can, all of the phones that you ever get connected, you can pull their MAC address and store it so that we know that if, Scott is trying to get in and check his email, it can only come from this phone. If he's trying to gain access from some other iPhone, because Scott would never use an iPhone, then we know we want to keep that blocked. So whenever we're setting up these devices and we want to establish trust, we know device plus user plus time and attributes, we grant access. So you can assign all kinds of things, and you really have to understand Azure AD in order to get through there. That is really all I've got for you. However, in order to get all of this information, I'll start where I'll give you links to all of the YouTube videos that I had started with. And the first one is from John Kindervag. He's the guy who created this entire concept of zero trust. He worked for Forrester Research at the time, and now Palo Alto Labs, I believe. And so he's still big in the space and talks about a lot. So if you look at a lot of the vendors that are going to talk about zero trust architecture, Microsoft is obviously going to talk about the layers that it can provide zero trust for, at the application layer, identity, and things like that. When it comes to actual network devices, firewalls, and segmentation gateways and stuff like that, Cisco is going to play big in there, and some of these other things. So does your organization have the money to re-outfit itself with all this new hardware so it can play smart? Probably not. It's going to take a minute. But so when you listen to the stuff coming from Cisco or Palo Alto, they're going to be talking a lot about hardware in addition to some of this identity stuff and whatnot that I've been covering. But I mean, I'm not qualified to talk about network devices outside of, what kind of a router you should get for home use. Last time I actually had to log into a network device that was government or client was about 12 years ago. Copy. Paste. And then this last one was from Justin Henderson, and he was with SANS. So if you don't know, SANS is like the go-to place for anything security related. Education. So these are the different YouTube videos that I've watched in the last 3 weeks in order to kind of beef up my understanding about zero trust. I am in no way an authority on this. I understand the concepts, but as far as, I can tell you what needs fixed. I can't tell you how. I am not an Azure Active Directory guru. I'm trying to learn. So I would suggest that if you need further information, you can go to all these links that are provided you. You can study up some. If you are looking to use a company, I know that Planet happens to be probably your best resource in the DC area. If you're outside of the DC area, Summit 7 is probably a good contract company to go with. I'm not getting any kind of kickback from either of those two for saying that either. They're just good companies that have very skilled people working on these things. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and take any questions if you got any for me. So if anyone wants to talk, just unmute yourself. Anybody? Okay. Then I'm going to stop recording now.